I'm especially happy to welcome you on the first day of this Black History Month. Yes, this is the second of a three-part series designed to advance conversations about what Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, same gender loving, and other sexuality and gender expansive people need in order to thrive in schools. In today's Practitioner Perspectives panel, we will hear about how young people's insight can shape adult thinking, as well as what education practitioners at these identity intersections need in order to thrive in schools. But first, a bit of housekeeping. Please feel free to chat with one another in the Zoom chat, but it will help us if you put your questions for the panelists in our Q&A section. We'll share a survey link for your feedback toward the end of the presentation, so please keep an eye out for that. And finally, these panels are being recorded and will be available to view. So keep an eye out for a follow-up email if you registered and the link to the panel one conversation in the chat. So tonight I am joined by a truly extraordinary group of experts, and it gives me immense pleasure to introduce them now. Eric Williamson is Black Boy Joy, obviously. He is the music teacher at PS 32, located in Brooklyn, New York, and serves as Repertoire and Resources Chair in Diversity and Inclusion for the New York chapter of the American Choral Directors Association. As an educator and a performer, he's committed to helping children find their voice in his music class, his private voice studio, and on some of New York's actually biggest concert stages, with the Grammy Award-winning Brooklyn Youth Chorus, very impressive. As an out teacher, he prides himself in teaching the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and identity, with an emphasis on child-centered experiences from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. As an emerging voice in music education, he has led workshops and sessions centering Black and Brown composers in choral music and beyond. He received his BA in music with a minor in African American Studies from Penn State University, shout out to Penn State, and his MA in music education from Teachers College, Columbia University, yay! Sharon De Bossier is the interim, did I pronounce that correctly? Bossier is the interim CEO at Education Leaders of Color at LOC. In her current role, Sharonda focuses on identifying, equipping, elevating, and sustaining talented Black and Latinx leaders to thrive in the highest level of education roles and lead a more inclusive education reform movement. Prior to joining EdLoc, Sharonda worked with a national nonprofit that supported and advised city-based education orgs on their efforts to grow great public schools. In addition to core advising work, Sharonda utilized her experience launching and leading a multi-state education engagement and advocacy organization to help members develop the skills and capacity to engage much more effectively with stakeholders. This is really important work. A graduate of the University of California, Santa Cruz, shout out to California, Sharonda started her career in education as a public school teacher and also brings years of legislative and electoral campaign experience in both volunteer and leadership capacities to her work at Education Leaders of Color. And last but certainly not least, Kamal James is a Bronx-born, Brooklyn-bred teacher and researcher, shout out to New York. He teaches earth science and facilitates the Gender and Sexuality Alliance at City Polytechnic High School. Thank you. As a gay, Black, first-generation American, Kamal uses his experiences to inform his pedagogy and empower his advocacy for LGBTQ+ issues. He is currently pursuing his graduate studies in science education at City College. Shout out to City College. His interests include natural hazard mitigation, climate resiliency, and environmental issues in the context of marginalized populations. Kamal's most recent research, presented at the American Geophysical Union, involved the mapping of tectonic features in Lake Azoulay, Haiti. He is currently exploring topics in environmental racism with his students. In his free time, Kamal fancies himself an amateur cartographer and enjoys walking the bridges of New York City, taking in the majestic urban jungle. Wow, y'all. And I'm Kia Darling-Hammond. I'm the Director of Education Programs and Research at the National Black Justice Coalition. I'm your facilitator for tonight. Please join me in welcoming this esteemed panel. Let's begin. Eric, I would love for you to start us off with this question, and then others feel free to jump in. Each of us carries the energies and memories of people who shape how we think about the world, in this case, thriving at our identity intersections. So as you settle in for today's conversation, who is entering?
Yes, thank you for that loaded question. I'm so excited to share. And happy Black History Month, y'all! Who I bring with me is my mentor, Dr. Anthony Tony Leach, who is still at Penn State. He was my first representation that you can be queer, black, out, and excellent. And I just aspire to be him one day. He's the first person I bring with me. My parents, of course, who taught me about unconditional love and support me to this day. My family, my chosen family and friends, I carry them with me. I also carry with me my mentors who are no longer with me. Dr. Donna King, who was also at Penn State, always fighting for social justice for everybody. My first pastor, Reverend Edward Wallace Holloway, who's no longer with us, who allowed me to express myself in church growing up. I also bring with me all of the queer ancestors who have the black and brown queer ancestors who have fought for us to use our voices in the way that we're using them today. And last and certainly not least, I'm bringing my current school leaders with me into the space who love and affirm and allow me to be Principal Denise Watson and Miss Adrienne Straker. I bring them with me as well into the space because truly I wouldn't be able to do any of the work I'm doing now without their love and support. Oh, and I'm going to pass it to Kamal.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Eric. So who am I bringing with me in this space right now? I would say I'm bringing my mom first. I think my upbringing, we had some disagreements pertaining to my identity, and I think that's why it means so much to bring her in this space with me because I learned a lot and she learned a lot too. I bring my friends, I bring my family members. I do like that notion of bringing ancestors too, Eric. So I'm bringing my ancestors here as well, um, and everyone who supports me and those who may not understand me as well. I think I'm bringing everyone here, including myself. So I'm going to pass this on to Sharonda.
Yeah, thanks. I, we listened to the young people, the panel from last week, and in thinking about who I'm bringing to the space, am thinking a lot about the young people who likely reached out to me when I was a classroom teacher and I didn't see them. And so I'm holding those young people close and bringing them with me into this space today, because I think that it is often easy to say that because I am Black and because I am queer, I saw my kids for who they were, and I may not have. And in listening to a lot of the stories those young people shared, that has really stuck with me. So definitely bringing the young people that I may not have seen who were sitting in my classroom with me into this space. And then also my my 11th grade U.S. history teacher, Miss Lee, who really most recently we've just had a couple of interactions where I'm like, you get me, 20 years later, you get me, and that feeling. Even at 37 just feels it matters so much. And so in thinking about where I may have let young people down, Miss Lee is a model to me, so bringing her into this conversation with me too.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those heartfelt thoughts. It means a lot and it matters, right? Because this work is work that we do for ourselves and for our communities. Um, I'm tearing up a little bit. Kamal, can I ask you to start us off with this next question, which is actually related to what Sharonda was talking about, which is this panel, this first panel of youth sharing their thriving needs. What resonates for you in those youth reflections? It could be related to anything, but what did you take away from their thoughts?
Based on the youth reflections, the one thing that stood out to me was this idea of community. And I feel like students need that community among themselves. And now that we're in remote learning and stuff, even for me, I'm being reflective. I don't think I'm facilitating those spaces enough. And back to what Sharonda said, I'm Black, I'm gay, and sometimes that representation is not quite enough. And so that's what I was hearing. They do have those one or two or maybe three allies who've been pivotal for their experience, but definitely listening to one of the panelists, you know, this idea of not having that community of other peers to talk to, I think that would make a difference. And so that's the one thing that stuck out to me. And I'm like, how am I going to facilitate a community for students to engage with each other, you know? So that's one thing. And I'm going to pass this on to Eric.
Yeah, I'm going to take that thought about community a little bit further. Angela Davis talks a lot about community consciousness. And what resonated for me was they felt the most safe around people who saw them for who they are, who supported them, the chosen family, the parents who were listening, those school teachers that might not have been like their homeroom teacher but have left a huge impact in their life. And so I think it's important that we are always creating space where our kids can feel safe. And I was actually really disheartened by the reality that schools are not safe. And there was a lot of trauma and hurt in their stories. But the to transition to more of a victor narrative, I was just really inspired and blown away by how they were still able to find success and to thrive once they found those people who were going to ride for them, those people who were going to advocate for them, the people who are instilling that confidence in them, especially for our trans folk who are always looking for another trans person to help them on that journey. I just, in this remote learning phase, I just can't imagine what that process looks like now from any age. So I think it's important that we are consciously raising our awareness and educating ourselves around all of these issues, because being Black and being queer, it's not enough. And we are evidence of that. We're in these spaces. Some of them are predominantly white. Some of them are interrace. But you know, thankfully, we are where we are and doing the work that we're doing. But institutionally, it's not enough support for them. And one more thing that that resonated with me that I learned is the term gender and sexuality alliance. I'm obsessed with that, and I hope that I could, you know, help offstart that in my own school community. And I'm going to pass it off to Sharonda.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on what the two of you have offered, I think, you know, thinking a lot about how brilliant those young people were, right? And I'm like, they have all of the tools and the skills, and it's how do we get out of their way, right? How do we, in creating, when we talk about creating community, I almost worry that that sounds too much like us doing it for them. And I'm like, how do we create and foster the conditions and like that allow them to do this for themselves? They have very clear ideas about what they need. And so I'm like, what are the structures? And I'm thinking about a leader that I work with, a Black lesbian woman who leads an organization called Diversity Talks, right? And she works with young people to design and deliver PD to their teachers, right? And I'm like, so what could that look like around gender and sexuality, right? For young people to actually say like, hey, here's how I identify, here is what I need to feel supported, right? And how do we create opportunities for them to be the architects of the solutions to the problems that we continue to fight, you know?
Yes. Yes. So, you know, I really love this this nuancing of the idea of what it means to make the conditions, right? Not just to give things to and to do things to young people, but to create the conditions that allow them to design their realities and design for their needs. Thank you so much. Yes. So the next question is for Sharonda to start us off. And I'm actually hoping that y'all will kind of go all the way in on this question. I feel like it's possible. So Sharonda, what do you need in order to thrive at the intersections of your identities as an educator? I know you're no longer in the classroom, but you have that context and experience, and you are a educator in many ways in your work now, and as a person in general. What do you need in order to thrive, and what would need to change? What would need to get out of your way to make that possible?
Yeah. So, oh, that's like it's a big question. And you know how you're like, the question is going to come, so you try and prep for it, and you're like, this is what I'm going to say, and then it comes, and then you're like, I'm woefully underprepared to respond to this because it is something I am thinking about. I'm Black. I identify as bisexual. I've been out since I was a teenager. I am a first generation college graduate. So even when I'm thinking about what I need to navigate my professional environment, I'm thinking about all of the social capital I did not have when I entered my career as a first generation college graduate that many of my peers did have. I didn't have a well-resourced network. I didn't have anyone to review my emails before I sent them to my bosses to make sure that, I was addressing people in the right tone, all sorts of things. And so even like a decade and a half, which is wild to say too, right, into into being kind of out of the classroom, I also make sure that I stay connected to young people, right? So one thing that I actually do need is connection to young people, because I think that it's really easy for those of us who sit in the nonprofit and policy and research space to be wholly disconnected from the communities and the classrooms we are seeking to impact. And so my goal is to always have a direct line to young people through my work. But I also think that I need to be in spaces with leaders who are asking themselves the hard questions about their identity and how their identity shapes their worldview, about their values, right? Because I think the other thing that I have learned over the course of my career is that just being in a room with Black people or other people of color does not make it a safe place for me, right? And I am also often thinking about what it means for people who have come before me in this work to create space for me to take risks, right? And by that I mean sometimes that literally just means for me to say openly how I identify, right? Because depending on what part of the country I'm in, where I'm working, like that could hinder my ability to build a meaningful and fruitful relationship, right? And so I am thinking a lot about what it means for the people who have the real reputational capital to expend in those moments to do that for me and on my behalf. And often when we think about and we talk about allies and co-conspirators and accomplices, we're often talking about what we want white people to do, but I'm also thinking about what I want men to do in a room, right? What I want cis and hetero people to do for their trans and queer counterparts, right? It is about recognizing that privilege is both relative and absolute. And in a situation where you have relative privilege, it is your duty to expend that privilege, right, on behalf of the less privileged people in that room. And so when I think about what I need, I'm like looking for folks to be like, no, sis, you safe here. Like, it's fine. Say what you need to say, right? Be honest about the feeling that you're having now. So I'll tell a very I do a lot of work supporting leaders, right? And often it means that leaders are coming to me when they are struggling with something. And I was working with a Black man and we just could not see eye to eye on something. And his reaction to that was to yell at me, right? And to scream at me. And no one stopped that. Right. And so what I needed in that moment was for people to see me and to see me as a woman and to see me as a woman who was like trying to get to a place of compromise. And I needed someone who had a little more like capital in that moment to be willing to expend it on my behalf. And too rarely do people do that for those of us who don't have it.
If I can just hop in, because first of all, he's trash for that, Sharonda, and I'm so sorry you have to deal with that. Like, we need to be protecting our Black women and trans women. There's a responsibility there, and that kind of goes into what I need and what I need to see and experience. In general, we just have work to do in terms of cultural competency, because I feel like there's a hierarchy of identity that people are putting all their efforts towards of celebrating or identifying. And when you think about school spaces, we're stuck in education because we can't get over the fact that there's Black folk. We can't even get past the fact that there are Black folk, Black and brown folk of varying cultures and varying backgrounds within the classroom. So it's very hard for us to even talk about queerness when one of the student panelists in the last talk were talking about how Blackness and queerness should intersect and they should kind of be one thing. And we're still stuck on race. That is very hard for anyone to even wrap their mind about queerness and the intersections that goes around race, culture, and queerness. Because, and no shade to the white teachers here, but a lot of y'all are the issue. Because, you know, you have the power, to Sharonda's point, of helping us to move forward in terms of our understanding of culture, of race, of these varying intersections. And furthermore, when we think about the queer community, our white queer folks as well have a very different experience and a very different understanding of what it means to be queer than a person of color. So I feel like there's a lot of there's so many misunderstandings. There's so many things that are kind of forced on us when we want to introduce queerness into the conversation. It is a white perspective. It is a white queer perspective, and that's not our experience. So when we talk about Black queer folks, there is a level of cultural competency and knowledge that you have to bring into the conversation. But if we can't get past the fact that we're Black and brown, there's no way we can understand all of the nuances of the queer experience for Black and brown folks. So I feel like from an administrative standpoint, we need principals who are really adamant about getting their teachers to understand who is sitting in their classrooms from jump, because the trainings that are being mandated right now are not enough and they're lazy, and it needs to be continual. And one thing I really value and appreciate about my principal and my leadership is that it is continual learning, it is continual conversations, it is continual things that are being presented to the staff, and it's real. And these kids, their lives are too valuable for us to not be intentional and to be lazy and to sidestep and to, you know, hide behind white tears and hide behind, you know, staying in our box. Like, we have to go there because it's literally life and death. Just hearing the students' responses from the first panel, it's like one little thing can be said and traumatize a child's life, especially from the youngest to the oldest. I mean, our positions are, and our influence is so strong that we need to have the training, the constant conversation to be changing our curriculum. So view the curriculum through this global lens, through the intersections, learning the cultures, really raising the community consciousness of our school communities from the admin down. And when that happens, I feel like we can really start truly creating that brave enough space, that safe enough space for our kids to start thriving and for them to start being and for them to unapologetically use their voices and express themselves. But it has to start at the top, because me by myself, I make impact in my classroom, but there's a whole school. You know, there's recess, there's lunch time, you know, there's things that are happening when the kids arrive to school and after school. So I feel like in order for us to really create that culture, we gotta really step it up in terms of our cultural learning.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Sharonda. I feel like I could not have articulated this better than you. And so I'm just gonna piggyback, because when Dr. Kia first asked, what do you need? I think, I'll be honest with you, I don't even know what I need sometimes. And I think that I'm being straight up. You know, and you both have clearly highlighted some things that I didn't know I was even lacking. And so, you know, I want to start with the idea of going back to Sharonda with privilege. As for me, I'm a Black man, I'm gay, but definitely I have a lot of privilege being a man and maybe being more masculine adjacent. And it actually last week was a case in point. We have trans staff member who was disrespected. And the student who disrespected them would never try me like this. They understand who I am. And so I even realized that, you know, it's not the same for everyone in the building. There is a hierarchy. When we're talking about queerness, there is a hierarchy when we're talking about, you know, where we all intersect. And so if you ask me what I need, I think primarily I need everyone to be able to acknowledge where people intersect. And I think that it's unwise to go about thinking that people can pick apart pieces of their identity. I wake up in the morning, I'm Black. I wake up in the morning and I'm gay. And, you know, those are two of my realities that I know of. And it's like, I feel like that plays a role, intersectionality, you know, understanding that we are complex, we are dynamic, and we do come with a lot of fruits, you know. And back to you know, Eric's point about listening to what the students said, it It hurt a lot because I saw myself in them. And then I'm even like, yo, I have a bomb principle. I get to be myself. I'm out here. And, there are students who still feel unsafe. So I think that having a supportive administration is awesome. And I have that, right? So I'm not lacking in that. But, there are other things where I'm like, what do I need? What do these students need? And, I don't know what I need all the time. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't. I guess I need love, and I think that that's where it starts. I think everyone needs love, and I'll take it from there.
One thing that kind of came up as Kamal was speaking is I feel like there's a shared responsibility that Black cis folk also need to own. Like, yes, we are in Black History Month, and yes, you may not be identified as LGBTQ. However, there are ways for you to still show that representation in your classroom. Black history doesn't mean we're not going to talk about queer history. It's all inclusive. It's all Black history. So talk about James Baldwin. Talk about Marsha P. Johnson. Like, we need your help in terms of lifting, elevating our voices. Like, it's not just a one-stop shop. And I feel like within the Black community specifically, there's always this avoidance and erasure of Black queer voices. I mean, even if you think about the ballroom culture, that's why it even exists. It was the only place where we could thrive and be ourselves, because the straight Black world is not accepting of us, and our kids still feel this today. Reasons why they do not feel like they can invite people in and share their identity with their peers across the different diaspora of the Black experience is because there's still the weird elephant in the room when it just comes to sexuality on its own and gender on its own and those structures. So I feel like, we could really help each other out and continuing the teaching and the education and the conversations without having a queer person in the room. And that's specifically for the Black teachers out there. I'm calling y'all out. We need your help. We can't do it alone. And, think about the impact that you have going so hard about Black Lives Matter and about the killing of Black and brown men, but you're silent about the trans folk. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. We have to protect everybody, all the Blacks, every single one of them. And I feel like that is a crucial piece that is missed a lot in this conversation when we're talking about intersectionality is the shared responsibility that we have, because we can only do but so much. It really needs to come for the ones who are in privilege, specifically Black cis men, who also, y'all need to stop doing this with Black women. And I'm ready to fight for Sharonda because he's off and I ride. But seriously, like, Black men, like, we gotta step it up and really protect and use our voices boldly and unapologetically to really look out for each other, because the ball is in our court. Black women been out here doing the work and shouldering the responsibility of so much. So the least we can do is protect.
I mean, yes, yes, yes. Thank you for those perspectives. Are you sure you don't want to add anything else about your thriving at school or your thriving in schools?
I can add something else. It's really important that we are constantly sharing joy and shifting the narrative from being victims. Because, I mean, that is literally shoved down our throat all the time for being Black and then for being queer. It's like all the trauma all the time, and it does not need to be that. Like, and I will say that at length, it does not need to be that. It's also just not serving us as Black folk to constantly be rehashing trauma. It's not serving us. So I think just being intentional about celebrating queer spaces and creating those experiences, and again, shared community consciousness, and shared responsibility, that is something beautiful that we can do together. Like, I would love, for schools to start throwing their own balls where kids, they can have their own categories, they can dance, it's really celebrate full expression of the Black experience, because we're doing it in some ways. We think about like fashion shows and step shows and things of that nature. Why can't it be a ball? You know, why can't it be a drag show? Like, why is it limited to just these small experiences? And when you think about the elementary age, like these kids live an imaginary play. Like it literally lends itself to ballroom, where you literally are walking all these different categories. And you know, I mean, I did it a few times at my school in my music classroom. We had a Halloween ball, and it was great, you know. But like from an institutional standpoint, that we allow these experiences to happen and that they're shared, and the focus is really on joy, because in the joy is a liberation, in the joy is identity and self-expression and acceptance, in the joy there is belonging. And you know, it actually can erase and heal the trauma and the wounds. And I'm speaking personally for myself. A lot of I live and I am flat-footed in black boy joy at all times. To force my way out of all of that self-hatred that I had, and not loving myself and not accepting myself. And the joy has power, and the joy is sustainable, and the joy can be created in any moment. And I think it's really about teaching and showing and expressing that at every chance we get, from your read alouds to your curriculums to your videos to how we even talk about the things. Like there's joy when I talk about and I'm gay and sensation. There's joy when I talk about it because it's something that I'm proud about. And there's not this audacity from teachers or from administration when it comes to the intersections. Like you may have a principal that has audacity when talking about LGBTQ, but no audacity when it comes to talking about the blacks, and vice versa. Audacity talking about the blacks, but no audacity talking about LGBTQ. And I think, you know, they can serve each other. And we need to also just stop with the, oh, I'm more oppressing you, and oh, I'm more oppressing you, and oh, I'm more oppressing you. Like, that's also a royal waste of time, because we know what tea is already about that. And let's get to work. Let's affirm each other. Let's create the love, joy, and abundance that we crave and we want to see in this world.
I'm so thrilled that you mentioned love, joy, and abundance. Yes, yes, yes. And one of the dimensions of thriving that we talked about was relief, right? And so I'm wondering if y'all have thoughts about not only ways that you were able to achieve relief from stressors, from feeling unsafe as practitioners, but maybe even ways that you've seen students achieve relief as well.
Um, so I'll go. Last year was 2019 was my first year teaching. And I just thought, you know what? I'm teaching black and brown students. You know, I'm black. This is a representation. This is what it is. I am out in life, but I decided to keep that part of my identity to myself. And I had a student who, you know, in more colorful language, it was said in the panel in the last video, but they pretty much said something derogatory about homosexuals. And it was like, oh, you a bati boy. And you know, me coming from a Caribbean upbringing, it was so triggering to me. But I looked at him and I said yes, right? Which I should have corrected him at the time, but I said yes. I said I'm gay, and now what? And you know, the relief, my everything was running. My adrenaline was pumping. I was like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And I was like, yes, I am. And I remember the whole class's reaction. They were all laughing. And I was like, you know what? What's so funny? And one of the kids are like, oh, you dead serious? Oh, you serious? And everybody was like, oh, snap. And I remember feeling so defeated. So, you know, only in retrospect did I really achieve some relief. And I thank that student actually, because, you know, they did something that I didn't have the courage to do. And, you know, by asking me something like that, it prompted me to come out to my entire school. And that is the biggest relief I've had so far, just being able to be myself, my authentic self. There's never a question to be asked, you know, what's up. You know, and I think that it now puts a responsibility on the students. So you know I'm gay, you know what's up. Like now it's up to you. The challenge is up to you to be respectful. It's up to you to acknowledge that there are different people, that you know, people that are unlike you. And so that was really a big relief for me, just being able to be myself. And through that, other students were able to be themselves or at least have this curiosity. And I was like, wow, like I really came out. My mom was like, why would you do that? You know, old school. And I'm like, I listen. I was like, you know, my back was against the wall and I have 30 pairs of eyes looking at me. And I was just teaching them about the rock cycle. I'm like, I didn't expect this either, Ma. So I was just like, yeah, you know, that for me is, it provides relief. And I think being able to, and you know, it's hard to measure it, right? The only metric I get are the thank yous, the oh, I appreciate you, you know, and that for me, like that's enough. And that's the sigh of relief I've gotten too from other students. I'm like, wow, I'm relieved because I get to be myself, and you're relieved in that as well, and you get to be yourself or start working towards that. So just being my authentic self has paid off. And you know, when I started teaching, you know, people would say that all the time. I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm sure I'm my authentic self. Yeah. And, you know, to be challenged to be my more authentic self, you know, that gave me a lot of relief. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Eric, were you going to jump in?
Yeah. Relief is a tricky subject for me because I think there are moments of relief, but I don't think I ever feel relief. I don't ever feel that in a long standing way. Um, the moments of relief that I have experienced were when I first came out to my students. I started out, most of my teaching over the past 5 years was teaching artist work before I transitioned fully to the Department of Education in New York City. And in my teaching artist work, I worked a lot with Black and brown young men. And when I came out to them and they were fine, that was a moment of relief. Like, oh, actually, it's fine. Like, why did I wait so long? Like, just because I understood my presence and influence over their life, and I also had a rapport with their parents. It was something I didn't want that to prohibit the relationship work that we were doing together to help them to cultivate them as performers and musicians, so on and so forth. And it ended up being fine. So that was a moment of relief. Another moment of relief was when I got hired at my current school, because I went in with the audacity of saying, this is who I am, this is how I teach, this is what I value. And my principal was like, okay. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I can do this. I can be my full self. I can bring I don't have to like hide parts of myself or hide parts of my passion in my work. That was a huge relief. And I think something that we need as out teachers is that feeling of relief and knowing that you have permission to be your full self in a space, in a professional space. And we find that permission with our chosen family, with our real family, but there is a disconnect when we move into our professional life where we don't necessarily feel like we have permission or allowed to operate in that same fullness, abundance, and self-awareness of who we are. But in general, just talk back to the point of relief. My life is always in danger. I look like a threat. When I speak the way that I speak, people are scared. Sometimes I put some bass in my voice, queer or not. If I'm in a suit, I can still get shot down tomorrow. You know, when people know that I'm queer, you know, it's a threat in certain spaces, and I acknowledge that. So there's always, I'm always walking through this world with just the awareness, the acceptance and love of who I am, but also the awareness that some people in this world may not accept or love who I am, or may be threatened. So I think, yeah, just that's what it is for me.
I don't really have much to add there. I think, you know, I have been out, right? And so, and in teaching and in moving a couple of places, people are like, well, what brings you to New York? And I'm like, well, my partner got a job in finance, and, you know, I'm moving with her. And so, like, just almost from immediate, like the initial conversations, people who were thinking about hiring me sort of knew what they were getting, right? I think the interesting thing is that you know, I publicly dated a man, and all of a sudden I wasn't queer anymore, you know? And you're like, so the way that bisexuality works is, right? And you have to like explain to people what it means. And then you have these moments where you actually feel like maybe you aren't going to be invited to the queer party anymore. And like, for instance, rarely, I sort of joked when we got on this prep call, right? Do people invite me to panels about being a queer educator, right? And it is because I am openly bi. And that is like a thing within our own community that we still have a lot of work to do around, right? But I will say that the way that it shows up most often in my current work is there are still lots of educators, many with careers much longer than mine, who come to the events that we put together and are just grateful for the fact that like there's a breakout session focused on queer issues, right? Or there's like an LGBTQ, you know, affinity group. And it's like, yeah, like they're queer educators all across the country, you know? And the other thing, I mean, we've sort of talked a little bit about this, right? Is that when people have been accustomed to being in queer spaces or spaces that were cultivated, especially for queer folks, those spaces are often overwhelmingly white. So for our LGBTQ affinity group last year, Roxanne Gay was our speaker. You know, she's on the speaking circuit, she's everywhere. And when she saw our members, she was like, oh, y'all are all people of color. And I was like, girl, we education leaders of color. Like, what did you, like, it's in the name, you know? But there was this moment for her, right? Where she was like, oh, like, right. Because she's been, even as a queer person herself, right? Spent so little time in those spaces and in those communities that I think for me, I think to Eric's point, these moments of relief, right, are when people affirm that the work that I am doing now to support them as educators who are in schools and classrooms is on the right track, right? And then also when I get invited to the party as a bi woman.
I want to just quickly add, I'm just living for everything they're saying today. Like, yes. I just want to quickly add that a lot of my commentary today, my comments today have been very teacher-centered, which is not the way I teach. But the reason why it has been this focus is because whatever I have permission and allowed to do, I'm automatically going to give it to my students. And I think that is a very important thing to just point out in terms of providing relief. If I don't have relief, how are my kids going to have relief? How are they going to have that moment of, wait, I have permission, I'm allowed to, like, it. So I want to emphasize that, again, institutionally from the leadership, how are you providing and allowing your teachers to be? I think that's the question, like whether you're queer or not, like it's important that we are allowed to be our full selves. And I think it's also important for educators to do the personal work, to get to know who the self is, who I am, how do I contribute to this world. And I think in the finding of who you are, you're able to connect with others deeply as well, and have a greater awareness of how you're not connecting with the intersections, or how you can deeply or have a deeper connection across intersections.
I do want to add on to what Eric said. This is my first year facilitating the Gender and Sexuality Alliance and trying to help students self-discover. I realized that I don't really have it all figured out either. And I'm working on that as well, you know, embracing my gayness and my blackness together, uh, and many other identities that, you know, I have. And so I realized that I hit a few bumps in the road. I'm like, how do I translate this? How do I explain this to you? I don't know how to explain this to myself. And that's what I realized. You know, I feel like self-discovery is a lifelong thing. And I feel like, you know, I'm making the right steps, but my students always remind me that I need to really step it up and check in with myself as well. And they've been able to help me do that. And, you know, I think that another way I get relief are from my students. They it's so benign sometimes, like how they show me these things about myself. They teach me all these lessons. I'm like, oh, this is not a lesson I didn't even know I needed to learn. So I learn a lot from my students, and I learn every single day from them. So I'm gonna add on to that. Yes.
Yes. I'm trying to do the wait time because I don't want to get in the way if anyone has more to add. This is
Yeah, one of the things that came up in our prep call, right, was talking about the diversity of our experiences, right? And the way that we talk about Black people and Blackness as if it's monolithic or universal, right? And so and it's not, right? Like I don't know what it's like to have Caribbean parents, right? I was raised by my grandparents who were born in 1932, right? My grandmother had passed away by the time I had come out, right? By the time my grandfather was around, and he just kept calling my girlfriend my sidekick because he didn't really have any other language for it. And I was like, cool, whatever it takes, right? And thinking about some of the other sort of nuances around our faith and the way that our faith shapes our experiences, and the diversity of faiths that exist within the Black community, right? Because not all of us grew up Southern Baptist, right? My family was like Roman Catholic. That's a whole other thing too, right? Thinking about like the history of colonialism in the countries that shaped the way that we view gender and sexuality, all sorts of things that we don't talk about when we talk about Blackness and when we talk about our experience of Blackness and sexuality and gender, right? And so when I'm listening to people talk, I'm also I'm learning so much, right? Because I'm listening for those things too. And when I'm thinking about supporting young people, I'm not just looking at you like Black woman to Black girl, or, I'm also thinking about, you might come from a completely different culture. Your family might have a completely different set of expectations of you, right? And what you do and how available you are, right? And, my friends who are the daughters of immigrants joke about the fact that like, they're like, oh girl, don't be the eldest daughter of immigrant parents because you can't do nothing, right? And those kinds of like, and so what it means then to say, actually, I'm going to live my life proudly and out loud, if that's the family dynamic that you're growing up in, it's just a very different experience than mine. And so even as we are talking about Blackness, I want us to also think about the fact that we don't all have the same experience of Blackness, right? And so, and as we are thinking about how it shapes our identity, I want us to be thinking about like all of the beautiful, complicated, nuanced things that make us who we are. And as Eric was talking about joy, one of the things that I did when I was teaching in Brooklyn is we did Flag Day, because the school was like, well, 98% of the kids are Black. And I was like, yeah, but this kid's Dominican, that kid's family's from Costa Rica, this kid's Haitian, that kid's Jamaican. We did Flag Day and the kids were like, hey, yo, miss, I'm finna turn up. I'm gonna have the biggest, right? Because there also should be joy in the diversity of Blackness, right? And we don't allow young people that either. And so I just wanted to offer that as something that had come up in our earlier conversation that I thought was just really important for us to surface here.
And one way to tag team with Sharonda, one way to do that in your classrooms, and it's something that you can easily do at the elementary age, but it could have a way deeper meaning and lead to more meaningful conversations at the middle and high school age. Bring a cultural artifact into your spaces. Like, share who are you? Like, not don't say who are you, because that's a weird question to ask, but like share something, like very weird question, don't say that. But like share something, and I'm gonna approach this from the context of a music class. What's a piece of music that you've listened to growing up? Because just as we are learning each other, we're also learning the kids and who they are and their interests and things of that nature. And that can lead to a wonderful conversation about culture, about all of the different intersections and categories that Sharonda was talking about. But it doesn't have to be limited to music. I just use that because I'm a music teacher. But you can do that across any type of medium, and Black History Month is a great time to do that. And also, if you're not working with predominantly Black kids, you also need to be doing this work, because these white kids will not have any exposure or any knowledge about culture or intersections or nothing like that if you're not talking about it in your classroom, if you're not showing it in the books and the curriculum. So I think it's not limited to just having Black and brown kids in the seats, because that's not, even though we are a majority in this world, we're not the ones who have power. So it's even more so important that in these predominantly white spaces and classrooms, that you're even more so talking about Black History Month, and you're even more so talking about Black LGBTQ in these spaces, because they will not know if it's never exposed or talked about. And the way the internet is set up, and the interwebs and all the social medias and things like that, they have access to it, but it is our job as educators to help them think critically about it, and to help frame that experience and grow that critical knowledge. So I really didn't want to miss the opportunity to say that, because not all of us teach in front of Black and brown kids. And it's not just for us, but it's also for the non-Black and brown kids as well.
Well, we're coming to the end of the session. This has been extraordinary. We do have one question, if that's all right with y'all, that has been posed from the audience. And I love this question. So this is, thank you, Matthew. While listening to y'all speak, thank you for being here, being vulnerable. I can't help but feel the need for a new school to be built. All of your ideas bring me to a place of building belonging, which is not our current system. What would your new school of belonging look like? Just a little question.
Wow. So what would my school look like? I think room for growth and reflection should be commonplace. I think that even me, I am somebody who has my own implicit biases, who will be so upset when somebody is engaging in their own implicit biases against me. And so I feel like I need work every day. And so I wouldn't expect perfection from staff members. I think students, we can't choose our students. I think that's a beauty in students and teaching. You don't get to choose them. And so, here they are. So I think as far as staff goes, just staff who are reflective, staff who are willing to put in the work. I think that's what makes a good school: white, black, green, purple, Latin, queer, trans. I think that is, if the impetus is to make sure that you're always growing, I feel like that's a good start. I don't know, I can't quantify if having X amount of black teachers or X amount of, I don't know what that looks like because, even for me, from my experience, right, as a black gay teacher who teaches predominantly black and Latino students, the representation ain't always it. It's not always cutting it. And so I already know that from my experience. So dare I say, oh, we need more black teachers. We need more this. I can't put a metric on that, but I think that just the idea of people willing to be reflective on themselves. Sometimes I might talk to students like I might be rough with a certain kid. I'm like, why did I do that? And I have to think about it. Am I handling my implicit bias? Is there a way I feel about the student, right? And I think that that's honest when you're honest with yourself. And so for me, a good school, if I were to create a school today, it would just be with staff members who are reflective, and who are willing to put in the work. I know it sounds corny, it sounds kind of vague, but I feel like everyone has a stake in this, and I feel like it doesn't matter who you are if your intentions are in the right place. I feel like there's always greatness to happen. I feel like it's not always going to, like, back to the whole idea of periods of relief, which I really liked. And you know what? I wish I thought about that more, because I'm like, I'm not always relieved, actually. I'm sometimes relieved. And so it's the idea that, sometimes we're not going to agree on things, and so, yeah, a good school community would be, having vibrant students from whatever background, right? And just having that love and that patience, and definitely that room to reflect, self-reflection. I think that's where it starts with. It's easy to point a finger, but sometimes I'm pointing at myself. I'm like, yo, you are bugging. Like, what made you do that? What made you think about that? Maybe you want to reevaluate how you feel about this or XYZ. And so I think that it comes out sometimes in teaching. It comes out sometimes in how I interact with other human beings. So just people who are willing to acknowledge their implicit biases. So
This is a hard question for me to answer because I spend all day thinking about it, right? So I'm like, do I talk about the curricula? Do I talk about the staff? Do I talk about the structure of the day? Do I talk about the learning platforms? Do I talk about the modules? How do I approach this? Um, I, Increasingly, I am convinced that poverty is the thing we must solve for. And chiefly because poverty exists not because we don't have the resources to solve for it, right? But because we haven't cultivated the political will to solve for it. And we know also that, like, poverty disproportionately impacts Black, trans, queer, same gender loving, right, young people. And when I think about what it means to solve for poverty, right, through schooling, I think about what it means to give young people the tools and the resources to design and determine their own destinies, right? And so I love this idea of like space for self-reflection, right? I love this. I love what I've seen some educators across the country do, where they help young people get access to like real world, real time career and life coaches, right? I think we tell kids like, you're 17, time to choose the college you want to go to and what you want to do for the rest of your life. And none of us would say that that is our journey. I am doing work and living a life I could not have dreamed for myself, right? At 17. And so I'm thinking about that too. I'm thinking about, and we talked a little bit about this too on our prep call, but also thinking about how so few of the kids we serve get the opportunity to have just loving, positive relationships with the adults in their lives, right? And how important and how critical that is to young people feeling like they can thrive. And so I'm in the midst of in this conversation, I'm like, what does it mean to just love young people, right? And to love young people and give them access to the things they need to be able to say, this is the life I want to live, and I'm going to chase after it, right? And I don't have an answer for what that school model looks like, because I actually think that that varies community by community, right? But I do know that at the heart of that, we have to tackle that we live in a society and in a culture where people think it's okay to hoard resources, where there's this hierarchy of basically we're rationing the right to live. We see that happening right now around COVID, around access to vaccines, et cetera, right? We have to create schools and learning communities where young people think about and have the tools to really, I think, push us in a new and different direction, so that we are living a life and designing lives that are more aligned with what this community has said are our stated values. That wasn't an answer, but that's what I'm thinking about. That's what that question sparked for me.
I think what is so interesting about teaching through a pandemic is it has revealed how flawed and trash and racist our current education system is. And the type of learning community that I envision that will push us, our students, to thriving really allows us to work on the process and the journey that is teaching, learning, community. And this whole testing culture is racist, it's oppressive. And to Sharonda's point, like this fake lack of resources and distribution of it is taking away our opportunity to make tangible, valuable, meaningful connections with our kids, because there's so many different barriers to their learning. And we see that even now with the structure of, teaching hybrid versus, you're in front of a screen for 8 hours. There's just so many different barriers. So I would love to see a school where the shit is flipped. And excuse me, just flip it all, tear it down, and create a space where there is continual reflection, there is continual love, there is continual accountability. There's also a lack of accountability amongst teachers in terms of the relationships that we are building and the actual teaching that we do versus these rigid ass curriculums and books that we're doing to help our kids pass a test. Like, there is no relationship building in there. There is no getting to know the kid in there. So I think there should just be always room for that type of reflection and real learning and relationship teachers, because we're modeling how we are treating each other. And the reason why there is bullying in schools is because the teachers will be talking trash about each other and being shady in X, Y, and Z, and the kids see everything that you do, down to the clothes you wear, the shoes on your feet. And we have to be accountable about that, about how we are navigating and modeling for our babies. And it really starts with the accountability for teachers to be more intentional about our own professional relationships amongst each other, with our administration, because the kids feel residual impact from that, both positive and negative, depending on your school environment. But I think getting rid of the way that assessment is approached at a large scale will really help us to really dig deep into the relational building that is teaching, because kids learn from each other all the time through modeling. Like, you learn more things. You remember the things you learn from your friend than your teacher, always. And I think there's a way for us to cultivate that type of positive learning environment if we tear down the current system that's not serving us for a variety of reasons.
And there you have it. Mic drop on at the end. Thank you. Well, so thank you everyone for for coming and joining us. Thank you to our panelists. I'm gonna leave us with a little call to action. The first piece of which is this question that was, how are you allowing people to be their full selves and vibrant? And how do you know who you are? In other words, that's the invitation to do the work. Our panelists talked about seeing young people for who they are and getting out of their way, fostering the conditions for them to design solutions, and ask for accountability, cultural competency, acknowledging intersectionality and the diversity of experience and the joy in the diversity of Blackness, representation, mutuality and support, growth, reflection, will, abundance, love, joy, and audacity. You can learn more about how to move all of this work forward by visiting nbjc.org and looking at our resources. Coming and tuning in next week as we do some synthesis across our first two panels. You can register at nbjc.org Black Educators, and following up with our panelists themselves. Thank you for your brilliance. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for being here. I hope everybody will have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm obsessed with you, Dr. Kaya. You're everything. Thank you for creating this space for us. Happy Black History Month.
Yes. Happy Black History Month. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Black.